Today on Typical Books, we'll be talking about Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. This is a 2025 book that came out in February, and a lot of people have already read it and reviewed it. So I've been holding off on watching a lot of reviews because I wanted to get this to print. I've been a little busy lately, so I had read this in time in February, and it's only now that I've been able to sit down and write the review properly. So here we are. A beautiful book. You may recall that I talked about this in the new releases. I had noticed this while compiling the list of releases for February, and the yellow cover jumped out at me, and the use of a fitting scalloped font and the oil painted girl's face. You may recall that I likened this to the cover of Incident in a Ghostland. The book and that film are very, very different. They do have a kind of similar tone in that there is someone completely unhinged rampaging around a gorgeous cluttered Victorian mansion. But yes, the back of this book made me think that I would get some like Shirley Jackson yellow wallpaper kind of feel out of this, or maybe The Haunting of Hill House, the Netflix series style kind of. They're quite different, but both of those herbs and spices do end up in this stew, let's say. I applied for a review copy and was sent an ebook for consideration. So as with every book that I enjoy, I will buy a physical copy for sure. It's a beautiful looking book, and typically I don't apply for a review or accept a review unless it's a book that I'd actually buy myself. The overview of this book is that Victorian Psycho covers about a year in the life of governess Winifred Notty as she moves into Ensor House to take care of her charges, Drusilla and Andrew Pounds. The Pounds family are extremely wealthy and have a gorgeous mansion in the English countryside. Winifred seems to be from somewhere nearby, a village nearby, a lower class. She has an extremely violent upbringing, and whether it is nature or nurture that turns Winifred into a psychopath, the titular Victorian Psycho is Winifred. There's no real spoiler there. From the back cover, Winifred Notty arrives at Ensor House prepared to play the perfect governess. She will dutifully tutor her charges, Drusilla and Andrew, tell them bedtime stories, and only joke about eating children. But long, listless days spent within the estate's dreary confines come with an intimate knowledge of the perversions and pathetic preoccupations of the Pounds family. Mr. Pounds cannot keep his eyes off Winifred's chest, and Mrs. Pounds takes a sickly pleasure in punishing Winifred for her husband's wandering gaze. Now, French tutoring and needlework are only one way to pass the time, as admiring the ugly portraits in the gallery and creeping across moonlit lawns. Patience. Winifred must have patience, for Christmas is coming, and she has very special gifts planned for the dear souls of Ensor House. So I've read that description before, and it is written very, very well. The rest of the book really is too. So we follow Winifred from her point of view as she deals with the children that she does not like, a family that she seems to resent, and a family that also treats her terribly. Whether she seems aloof or antagonistic or just unfit to be a governess, we can't quite tell at first. She does not seem to have like the schooling or credentials or desire to actually raise children. As a horror novel, that absolutely works because it has beats placed within that are like twisted and gruesome and compelling, and this works to paint Winifred from the get-go as a villain, much like its titular counterpart, American Psycho. Much like American Psycho, there is a little empathy here because we want to see how far this psycho will take it, and we want to see if there's any semblance of humanity left within her. We want to see if Winifred Notty is even there at all. So it also works in a literary sense as a drama or a tragedy or just a literary exercise, albeit a very dark one, in liking the unlikable character. Everyone really likes this gray morality these days for whatever reason, but this book is really the height of that I have seen. I think it's beyond gray, morally gray character. I think that this is a morally black character that you can't help but kind of root for. The shining star here is Winifred herself. We spend all of the book with her behind her eyes, and we want to kind of imagine the governess from Turn of the Screw, or a little bit of Mary Poppins because of the time and the setting. And instead we're greeted with this extremely robust, tanky woman who is overweight, unattractive by her own admission, unwashed and smelly, and is intelligent and witty, yet extremely warped and selfishly twisted. So Winifred is this type of person that could all of a sudden change into a werewolf, and it would not be entirely unexpected. I think the most interesting thing about Winifred is that she knows she is absolutely evil and unhinged, and while not reveling in this cartoonishly, she completely accepts herself. The most terrifying thing about Winifred is that you see shades of that in people from history. So there are real people walking around amongst us right now who behave and think just like her. And I don't only mean serial killers. Yet on the other hand, she also seems like a really interesting and kind of insanely fun person at parties, right? I think they say that. You know, it's either that they were insanely fun at parties or they were a nice quiet guy that lived next door. So with the theme and setting here, our main character kind of sets a tone all of herself because it's her tone of voice we're dealing with. We fall into this love-hate relationship with her because she's utterly insane and horrible and cannibalistic and vile, but highly entertaining. There is this opulent setting of Victorian England. I think that the theme and the setting sort of play hand in hand because we are told this is sort of like a stream of consciousness diary entry. Of course, diaries were all the rage in the 19th century, and we can easily picture one of the Bronte sisters keeping a journal to this effect. There were probably a lot of more untapped and undocumented dark insanity going on at this age than any other time. It was an information age, recall. So people were getting a lot of warped ideas from the news and from overseas. And for the first time, while still having this grotesquerie of animal slaughter, near primitive medical practice, sky-high infant mortality, all sorts of insanity at their very feet, they had their wheels turning. Many of the conventions of books about Victorian England and mansions specifically are present in this book, like rolling countryside and surrounding desolate woods and moors and claustrophobic mansion of epic proportions. It's in a labyrinthian mansion. So people can go off into any wing or floor of the house and get away with murder, literal murder, and have it be hours or weeks before anyone notices what they've done. Creeping around in the dark with a candle wearing a nightgown is a regular occurrence. The barn, the pigsty, the kitchen, and the nursery itself all add to this air of like dank, stuffy, stinky reality in the Victorian era. It was not all whalebone, corsets, and frilly lace. There was manure and disease and rot and filth in every corner. Even their posh main course meals had a demented sadism compared to a plowman's lunch. However, from the family portraits lining the long, dark hallways and the sterling silver adorning the long, dark dining table, there's this upper crust family. So they are a little removed from all the realities of the world regardless. So that brings us to Winifred Notty, who is absolutely removed from reality in every way. She's a monster in human form and truly does whatever the hell she wants, be it in a hovel or a haven. Doesn't matter to her how opulent her setting is or if she is in a literal pigsty. Now, many of the other characters are well developed but are like insects to be crushed underfoot in the way of Winifred's grand design. She is not just a psycho rambling past this family on a whim. There's something at play in her mind. So the children themselves are salt and pepper, a little blonde girl who is sweet and everyone seems to adore, that is gorgeous and like a little porcelain doll. She takes very feminine classes with her governess and she like sort of revels in this laziness of having to learn French and needlepoint. Andrew, on the other hand, is this little boy. He's a snot-nosed brat, and he's interested in rooting about, getting into trouble, and the educational equal of poking frogs with sticks and other boyish things. So he's not the least interested in his actual studies. There are servants and visitors that come and go, and some are really interesting, and they're rounded out. They round out this cast of characters as well. So everyone has their place. No one is disposable. It's an important thing here and really well written. That way that even the smallest character is important. So the wife, of course, the lady of the house, she wants to run a really tight ship and she would do a lot better if her family were all cardboard cutouts. But I'd say that Mrs. Pound is the least developed of all the characters. She's just a really jealous, petty woman. So Mr. Pounds is interesting in the other way. We spend most of the time with him in that she spends a lot of time with the children, but Winifred talks most about the time she spends with Mr. Pounds. Once in a while, he takes his morning constitutional little tramp around the grounds with Winifred in tow, and it's on these walks that we see that there's some sort of plan afoot, although we can't really discern what it is. And often the camera goes dark on these walks. Now, while we don't think there's anything untoward going on, the wife obviously does, it's just apparent that when Winifred and Mr. Pounds go on these walks, they get along well. And this is rare because Mr. Pounds is a stuffed shirt of a man and not very agreeable, easily dislikable, kind of grotesque, pig-headed business person who only cares about acquiring and maintaining wealth and power. And he's also the laziest man in the novel in perhaps all of England. As mentioned, the writing style is like a diary entry, so we don't really spend a lot of time getting to know these people outside of how they present themselves to Winifred or what she thinks of them. She's a very intelligent person who has seen some things, so her descriptions and depictions of those around her are kind of tainted by that. Our lead character spends some time in the middle of the novel in a dank, isolated, grotesque, and lonely area. So I don't want to get into exactly what that is because I don't want to give anything away. But she does have sort of like this rebirth moment in the book, which is quite interesting. And we see that her insanity ramps up after that incident. It's like the dark mirror of a final girl arc in many ways. So we go between this sort of dry humor, dark humor, gallows humor, if you will, with pinpoint lights of hopeful moments and normalcy in the writing. And then we go right back into the very matter-of-fact gore, grotesquerie, and murder. That grotesquerie and gore that I love so much has a little bit of everything. There's a little self-mutilation, self-loathing. There's a lot of sick cruelty against children, against Winifred herself. And there's a cannibalistic aspect and a real disregard for animals, living and dead. And she just proves over and over through this kinetic style that we could expect literally anything from this main character, let alone the plot. And it works really well to keep us interested page after page. I found this a really quick read, but I would take a break and just want to go back to reading to see where it would go because it's so unpredictable. Of course, this is sort of like a diary entry, so every chapter is like a self-contained story of the day or the last few days. So there's not a page that goes by without something happening, and the pace is kept high and light because of that. Even when we go back to a memory of Winifred's, it's pretty short-lived, it's extremely important to the story, and always very dark and very disturbing. Unlike some flashback scenes, these are ones that you'll want to read. So for readers that have sought the darkest of dark Victorian literature, I think this would be a superb addition if you've been like avoiding modern horror literature and wanting to stick to older classics like that or gothics. This will fit right in. The research and attention to detail in the 19th century are pretty illuminating, and I found it very interesting. Of course, it has modern elements like a sophisticated worldview, modern pacing, and uses fairly modern genre language. This dance between dark, disturbing, outright grotesque is something you would more often find in contemporary horror literature. While it can be compared to a strange blend of Turn of the Screw and the Yellow Wallpaper and American Psycho, I think that there's some film comparisons here too, like the Haunting of Hill House series, the Penny Dreadful series. If you like those, you'll like this, and maybe even Crimson Peak. I absolutely enjoyed this book and will seek out previous books from Virginia Feito. And I listened to her interview on Talking Scared podcast, which was super interesting to hear about this Spanish-born author that was new to me. And we learned that this is being made into a film right now. I am very excited to see this film. I'm also very excited to see Clown in a Cornfield. Like, a lot of really cool books are coming to film right now. But yeah, this is one. It has been one of the most refreshingly sick books I've read already this year. So I'm looking for more just like this. It seems to be like a rare gem though. So I know a lot of people have already read Victorian Psycho. Have you read it? Or are you now excited to read it? Or is it not what you expected? Let me know in the comments below. Also, on Patreon, I do have a free post right now because I took this review that I wrote today and the review that we just talked about, and I fed it into Notebook LM, which is an AI note-taking helper app. And I'm not a big fan of like using AI to write stuff, but I do take things and put them in AI to get points. Like, tell me 5 things that are wrong with this, or tell me 5 things I missed, that sort of thing. So I explain it all in the Patreon post, but the end result was that I clicked on a button within Notebook LM that turns your notes into a little podcast. And I found it creepy and hilarious. So if you're interested in AI, large language models, Notebook LM, and like what these weird, non-existent people could do and say, it was so interesting to me. So if you're interested, I'll leave a link down below so you can check out a podcast of 2 pretend people talking about this review. It's so weird. But anyway, I have recently been reading my next review that I'll talk about. I finished reading this already. I have posted the review on my site at typicalbooks.com. So if you're interested in hearing what I thought about At Dark I Become Loathsome by Eric LaRocca, feel free. If you follow along, you know that I wasn't the biggest fan of Everything the Darkness Eats. And I did like quite a lot in Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. And there were things that I didn't like about that book as well. And I'm really interested to see more from Eric LaRocca after reading this. Quite excited, quite the fan now, because I really enjoyed this. I know that this is pretty divisive. There's a lot of people that don't like the style here, but I found it so claustrophobic and good. Yeah, highly recommend, but I'll be talking about this more on the show coming up because, like I said, I've already written the review, but I do want to talk about it here. So if you're on the fence, you could be enticed to read this. I also just finished reading Pressure by Jeff Strand. If you're interested in hearing about this, let me know, because I could talk about it on the show, but I think I'll just review it on the blog. But if you want to hear about this book, let me know in the comments. But yeah, have you read any of those books? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of that weird podcast on the Patreon, and have an ooky, spooky day.